Gibraltar is blessed with a rich variety of natural and human history. The rock and the town below have been home to many cultures and people over the centuries. The artifacts, monuments and memories that remain become our heritage, a common inheritance which we all share. And as Gibraltar moves forward and grows, it is up to us as a society to make sure this heritage endures and becomes a part of our future as well. Leading this effort is the Gibraltar Heritage Trust, an independent statutory body entrusted with the preservation of our heritage, whose aim it is to ensure that modern Gibraltar retains history and heritage at its heart. In 711, the Moorish period of the Iberian Peninsula began when Islamic Arabs and North African Berbers crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and defeated the Christian Visigoths. What followed was 7 centuries of Muslim rule, where the Moors made their mark with science, music, art and architecture. In Gibraltar, there still stands a few significant sites from the period, most notably the Tower of Homage, standing proudly above the old town. But there are other, more inconspicuous constructions from this time, one of which we are about to look at a bit further.
We are here at present in what is called Europa Flats. On the upper level you have what is called Windmill Hill Flats, but in Spanish times this was called Los Tarfes Bajos and the Tarfes Altos. One has to use a lot of imagination, especially with all the buildings around here, but if we go down to very early times, it is very possible that what we are talking about, what is now familiarly called the Nun's Well, possibly is one of the oldest man-made structures on the rock. The first city of Gibraltar, the Medina al-Fat, the city of Victory, which was a very small place, was built what is now the Moorish castle. But it is very possible that there was a settlement here on the Tarfes. So much so that one of the early writers, Alonso Hernández de Portillo, writing in 1610, 1620, said that this was called, apart from the Tarfes, an area, there was a Moorish gateway, and that was called El Corral de Fez, like the market of Fez. And his theory was that Moors from Africa would come over to do trading with the Spanish Moors, because Gibraltar was Spanish at the time. There's a theory that the engineer who was brought over for the Medina al-Fat, this was in 1159, 1160, by Abd al-Mumin. It was called, bear with me, Al-Hajj Jiz. He was a very celebrated engineer. He planned the city and also planned the reconstruction of the Caños de Carmona, which was a Roman aqueduct in Carmona, and also the very interesting underground reservoir under the castle of Jimena de la Frontera. And if you look at the plans of that, they're very similar to the plans of the Nun's Well. It's very possible that there was, as I was saying, a settlement here on this flat piece of land as opposed to the other parts of Gibraltar, which is all slopey. This is also borne out not only by what Portillo says, but what was originally, what is now called the shrine, was a little mosque or a Moorish Islamic oratory, and that could date from about 1360. But it is very possible that this dates from about 1160. I know that the Gibraltar National Museum carried out some archaeological work here some years back when there were structural works going on, and they found Marinid and Nasrid ceramics and pieces of ceramic as well, or other relics. They dated from about mid-13th to late 14th century, but that doesn't mean that this couldn't have existed before that date. They've been called cisternas, banias moriscas, but the name Nun's Well comes from this guy, Robert Poole. He came to Gibraltar in 1748, and he saw this big reservoir here, and he had been told that there was some kind of place of worship had existed near here, which was the old hermitage, la Ermita de la Virgen de Europa. And he thought that there was a convent, and that the nuns would have come here for bathing, and then he called it the Nun's Well, and Nun's Well is what we call it nowadays. It's like so many other things that, you know, carries on the old name. But it was basically a reservoir for irrigating all this area here. The thing is that now we have the mosque here, but just imagine that there was nothing there. You got the slope, there's a porous limestone rock, and the water would have percolated into these man-made reservoirs. They are, I think they're about 12 meters 80 by 1340 in width and 2.38, if I remember rightly, in depth. But they were bigger than what it is now, because there's another part which apparently is blocked up. This certainly happened way back in the mid-19th century, because by 1910, Major Edward Kenyon was saying that the reservoirs have been divided into two parts. One in this area here and the other under the church. There used to be a chapel here, a Europa Garrison Chapel, also called St. Barbara's. Another very interesting building that was situated here was way back in the very early 19th century. We had the person who later became Queen Victoria's father, Edward, Duke of Kent. When he came over to Gibraltar in May 1802, he discovered there was a lot of drunkenness on the rock, especially by the troops. There had even been cases of 2 Spanish ladies having been raped. So he decided, of the 90 taverns that were in Gibraltar, he closed half of them. It was a big furore at the time. But he decided to, on this spot here, to build a brewery, to provide good, honest beer for the troops. The poor man, you know, there was a mutiny against this and many other measures that he took, and he was packed off in May of the following year. The brewery remained for about a year or 2 years, and then it became a barracks. And later, that barracks part of it became what I was telling you about, a church, which was the Europa Chapel. We are now in the interior of the Nun's Well. I must say it is quite impressive, even in the state that it is now. You can see that the cistern is made up of 4 barrel vaulted chambers and supported by these square brick pillars and interconnected with arches. There's a lot of staining on the walls, because you can see where the different levels of the water, and over the years a lot of rubbish has been inside as well, so that's part of the reason for the staining. As you can see, especially for people who have been to the Moorish Bath under the museum, this is very different to the context of that place, because it doesn't really look Moorish, but the Islamic architects not only designed for effect in having something which was beautiful with columns, but also for practical reasons. But many of the writers used to say that this was possibly even done earlier than from Moorish times, but I don't think that is the case. The earliest account we have of the place comes from Pedro Barrantes Maldonado, who wrote about Gibraltar following the attack by Turkish and Algerian pirates on the 10th of September 1540. This was published in 1566. He spoke about this place, so that is the earliest account. So, you know, Gibraltar had only been Castilian or Christian for about 100 years, and it was already an old structure. Over the years, lots of things have happened here. Way back in 1986, the Royal Engineers decided to put up a pseudo fortified building on top with crenellations that over time disappeared. But way back as recently as 2019, the government decided that this place was worthy of restoration as part of the bigger restoration of Europa flats per se. They started work here, removing a whole lot of detritus and rubbish from here, and set up where we are now, which is a modular floating pontoon which is fixed to the ground with a steel support. So depending on the level of the water, it's very low at the moment, but this we could have people coming in here and we would be at a greater height. For the very few visitors of which we have descriptions of the place, this must have been a place of wonder for them. You can imagine visitors coming here way back in the 17th or 18th century, and obviously they looked at these chambers and they would have imagined that this could have been compartments which have been separated for people to bathe in. We had, as I said, Robert Poole saying that was a place for nuns who never existed in the area coming here to bathe, and the name has remained. On other occasions it could have been for the Moorish sultans or chieftains in Gibraltar having their meals down here. So they didn't have a clear idea, especially if the water level was very, very low. But it's all speculative, you know. It's what they would have imagined and not for the actual purposes, which was for a reservoir for water for irrigation. For heritage, I think this is a very significant place because unfortunately, due to the amount of sieges that Gibraltar has withstood, there's very little left of anything of the Spanish or Moorish periods, especially in the city, because it's almost like scenes of Sarajevo, hardly anything existed, apart from part of the convent, the governor's residence, and what is now the cathedral and the Moorish castle. So having this particular structure, which is no great beauty, but it signifies a very important part of what was going on in this area at the time.
Gibraltar's motley mix of colourful landscapes, eclectic architecture and diverse cultures has served as inspiration to artists for centuries. From the romantic depictions of admiring travellers, to the battle scenes which immortalise the heroes of Gibraltar's many conflicts, to the gentler scenes of ladies and officers in the garrison. Artists have been essential in capturing Gibraltar through the ages, giving us vivid representations of moments in history. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a blossoming of artists, which many consider to be the genesis of a new wave of Gibraltarian art. A contingent of artists whose works express a certain Gibraltarianism, which has come to define the Gibraltarian art scene throughout the 20th century up to the present day.
In 2011, we had the exhibition of Gustavo Bacalisa's work, and I think it was the first time that we had an important corpus of work coming together and an assessment of how important a figure he still is and what an influence. So it took us back to a Gibraltar of the very late 19th, early 20th century, and of course we saw how he saw Gibraltar, which is interesting because his optic, even though he studied in Italy, is very much the French impressionist. So how he has become not just a name of a place in Laguna, but a symbol and a reference point for, okay, he saw it that way. Azaguri saw it in a very, very different way. Lenny saw it in a very different way. Mania also see it in a different way. So all those possibilities of looking and interpreting the place are, for example, there in the City Hall and the collection that is there. So that's been a very good ground to see how did the generation of the 20s, 30s look at Gibraltar, and how are we to look now?
We're here at the National Art Gallery, the Mario Fillinson National Art Gallery, and the whole idea behind it is really to have a permanent place where we can celebrate Gibraltar's artists, Gibraltar's perhaps bygone heritage artists, those who were active over 100 years ago, and perhaps it's fair to say artists that have inspired some of our contemporary and well-known artists that practice nowadays. So it's a place where we can celebrate their artwork and maybe even take a look at what Gibraltar used to look like, because a lot of these artists were influenced by the imagery and the landscape that Gibraltar was, and it's lovely to be able to look back and see those scenes that have now changed, especially when we bring young people to the gallery. It's something that really fascinates them.
No, we'll start with the eldest and probably the most important, which is Gustavo Vacarisas. And again, he's a man who was outside of Gibraltar for many, many years, but still I think always had this, obviously, more than nostalgia for the place, because this is the place he comes from. But he paints Gibraltar with all the influences that he has gathered over the years. And for example, the views of the upper town are, you can sense the French impressionists all over the place. Asaguri is more of a hardliner, and he looks more at the post-impressionists, again the French, especially Van Gogh. And I think you could say the same maybe about Leni, but Leni's color scheme is a bit more extreme. I mean, she was a wonderful colorist. But Mania really, and now that I'm seeing more of Mania, really gives you a sense of space, and he puts people in his paintings. I remember, I was there at the time, it must have been about 10 or 11, so I remember those people, the people who used to sell flowers in La Piazza, the water sellers, all that. So you see Gibraltar, but you also see the people who were around in the 60s. And Mario, what he does is, I mean, he takes the upper town and the architectural stimulus as a playground for himself. He plays around, which is great. He plays around, he doesn't have to go through DPC, he can do it with paints, so he can move stuff around and put whatever colors he wants, which is a great statement of freedom. The thing is that, and we have to say care, is not to ape. The thing is not to do now like Gustavo Vacarisa. No, I am interested in seeing somebody who's looking at Gibraltar and taking risks. For example, there we have Popham, and she's done a collage of views of Gibraltar painted, and I think it's very interesting what she's done. So that's what I'm interested, that we don't stay stuck and look back too much, because if not, it's going to be like Lot's wife. You know, when you look back, you turn into a pillar of salt. No, you have to move, you have to know what's been done, get your lessons from it, and move on and find your way of doing Gibraltar.
Since 1991, the Gibraltar Heritage Trust has held an annual art competition, which aims to highlight heritage sites through the artist's eye. Often, when one stops to paint or sketch, it is essential to study the subject and analyze it to draw out its story. Over the years, the competition has focused on some of Gibraltar's most valuable heritage sites, producing a diverse and invaluable collection of works, which, throughout the years, have captured Gibraltar's changing landscape.
I think it's fantastic that we've got an organisation, an establishment like the Heritage Trust that has brought together the arts and heritage and supported it with this annual event for over 30 years. It brings together people of all ages. It really makes artists perhaps look at certain sites around Gibraltar differently, and just in that act itself, it promotes that particular area of Gibraltar, and I think indirectly, through the lasting artwork and through the experience itself, it's putting that area on the map.
Every year that we have the Heritage Trust painting competition, it's always a good opportunity to see how artists and artists of different ages get to look at Gibraltar and the particular environment that has been chosen. And it's not only, I think, a question of looking at what is there, but feeling the place. And that is, I think, as having been one of the judges, I was on the lookout to see how the different artists felt the place, how the place chosen started to have meaning maybe for them, and how they started a bit like opening out the different skins of the area to get to a heart of what that subject or an area chosen was like. Some people chose the playground, some people chose the actual lighthouse, some went for the Europa flats, some went for the stone. What we got was a kind of polyphonic vision of the area and of course the weather as well, because we tend to forget about, and Gibraltar is very weather conscious, Levante, Poniente, and that also plays part, because I know, for example, that when they arrived, it was 8:30 or something like that, you couldn't see anything. So all that space that you were supposed to decipher was invisible. It was like Turner, Mark 100 over. So, and slowly, it would make a nice analogy to see how the clouds lifted and maybe to see clearly, aquí que hay.
I think in terms of what motivates me as a, sometimes I have trouble calling myself an artist, no? In terms of interpreting what I see with paint, I think what differentiates an artist from maybe photography is what you choose to depict. And for example, sometimes like I particularly like to paint from life, and sometimes I can start painting at 9 and I'll start a drawing, but the decision to what include in the painting in terms of where the shadows are cast maybe won't happen until 11 or 12, or maybe I'll go to a particular side in the morning and then I'll find that it's the evening light which captures it better.
So there's all these different layers and choices as to what do I paint, what do I look out for, what do I feel for, how much the intensity, and of course then there is the technical aspect of how good a painter you are.
I don't think people are necessarily born that way. I think it takes practice to harness this particular observation or appreciation. I think maybe with music you might need more of a innate gift, but I think drawing and painting can be developed. And I think I remember when I was 16 being in Bayside, being taught by Peter Parodi and Fernando Gomez, like perspective, 2-point perspective, and all of a sudden you see buildings in a completely different way. And I think initially, like when I was younger, I've always liked to paint, I've always liked to draw, but it's a combination of learning certain tools which allows you to manifest what you're seeing. It's like the input that you're getting from an object and the output. But the output isn't only innate, the output is an amalgamation of all the tools you've learned which allow you to do it, no? Like a musician would learn rudiments. And I think that appreciation, or the ability to interpret something in the way you want, develops the more you do it. So for example, when I painted 10 years ago, I was more focused on getting something right, and I would really labor to the drawing aspect, because maybe my drawing wasn't as strong. But the more you do it, the more proficient you can be at capturing something, and it's really very, very enjoyable to just sit somewhere and be confident in your drawing and paint it from life, which is particularly what I like doing.
The thing that I think that unites them is a love of Gibraltar. I mean, you can see the attachment, more than attachment to the place, this kind of visceral hanging on to the place. Is there a Gibraltarian voice? Well, I don't know. I don't know. I think that something definitely is cooking.
There is also like a common colour palette in Gibraltar. I remember when I used to live in London for about 5 years after studying, and when I used to come back, I was used to notice like how yellow the light is in Gibraltar. No? You go to London and everything's like a little bit dull, a little bit pale, no? And suddenly you'd come back and you'd think, oh, like everything looks, you know, like Kodak, you know, like really, really bright.
And Gibraltarians, let's not forget, are quite curious people. And we are, well, most of us are bilingual, some of us trilingual, so we change vantage points very successfully. And so maybe that gives us flexibility. It's a bit like, I go back to La Farola. La Farola es así. Y es así, y da vuelta, and the light goes tu, 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 tu. And that's how we should all be in life, una farola. ¿Qué hay aquí? ¿Aquí qué hay? And Gibraltar is also an extension of that, because just physically how it is, you know, and we look out, north, south, east, west, we know that. And, you know, the first thing you look, outside, what's cooking?
You know, a national gallery is a symbol in itself, I think, for any community. There's that element of nostalgia when you walk into this gallery, because I think you are taken back. The fact that you see some scenes of a bygone Gibraltar and trying to get a sample of what Gibraltarian life was all about.
Historically, it probably had a greater significance on a place's, you know, the space and time of the particular place. I think more so today, or for the last 100 years or so with photography, in terms of the historical significance, maybe not as much, but maybe the inverse of that is that it also gives you an indication as to the people in a particular space and time. So it's not only about the place, but the individuals that have painted it in a way.